Hey, David.
Hey, Jen.
What are you listening to this week? Welcome to season 6 of What Are You Listening To? The weekly podcast created to foster community through music by sharing the stories behind the songs that soundtrack our lives. Some of the songs are old, some new, all good. I am Jenn Tully, and this week I'm joined by David Hamburger. David is the founder and host of Fretboard Confidential, an online membership for learning fingerstyle blues guitar. In addition to creating Fretboard Confidential, David has also written music for television and film, worked as a music journalist, written numerous instruction books, and toured with the iconic Joan Baez. This week, David is going to give us some insight into his songwriting process and tell us about fingerstyle blues guitar and why he loves that particular genre. As always, David and I are going to get to know each other a little better through 4 songs. 2 are David's picks and 2 are mine. Which songs do you think we're going to discuss? Tune into our conversation to find out. And in case our song picks are new to you, we'll publish a playlist with the episode so you don't miss a beat. With that, let's get started. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks,
What
Jen.
what are you listening to this week?
Not the instructions on how to start the podcast, obviously.
Right. Yes, we had some technical difficulties, listeners, so we're both kinda coming down from that.
Not supposed to step on your lines. I'm listening to Who Put You Behind the Wheel, which is a track by Charlie Hunter.
Yes,
And
let's talk about this one.
okay.
I thought this I always call out when a guest brings a song that I am not familiar with, and this falls into that category. So I'm always happy to hear new songs. So tell me about this song. Tell me why I know it's hard, especially for my musicians when I have musicians on the show to just pick 2 songs. So tell me why this one, how you chose this.
The main reason is because it's maybe 6 minutes long. And
Yeah.
about 4 minutes in, it takes a complete left turn, and there's this
Yes.
completely different and surprising part of the song that it just is it just is fills me with joy. There's just something about what's going on at that moment that just reminds me of everything that I have loved most about music since I was like 13. And so it has that moment in there. And there were, of course, a million things I could have picked, but I also didn't want to pick whenever I do anything like, a playlist or someone says, what do you like best or whatever. I look at my list and I go, God, everything here is over 50 years old. This is so sad. And so I was determined for this podcast to pick some things that were actually made in the 21st century.
And then I hit us with something really old, which we'll get to, but
So I get to feel superior. But also, Charlie Hunter is a musician that I've been really, really interested in for the last handful of years. He plays an instrument that he invented called the hybrid guitar, and
Oh.
it has bass strings on the bottom and guitar strings on the top, and it's wired so that you can have the bass and the guitar come out of different amplifiers. You can basically play 2 instruments at the same time. And so
Wow.
it's kind of like the bigger, more cosmic version of the solo guitar player who plays a self-accompanied style, which is
Mhm.
fingerstyle blues and fingerstyle anything else and finger picking and classical guitar. But he came up with this thing, and he's been doing it for the last 30 years. Um, and I it's just a really interesting idea to me, and he's just a really musical guy, and I just I his records are really interesting to me. I haven't seen him play it, but I would love to.
I had no idea about the instrument. That's super interesting, and I don't even think I read about that. Like, when I was reading about him and kind of researching and digging in, I was super intrigued. Like, side note, random side note, my maiden name is Hunter,
Oh, that's
and
funny.
so whenever I saw the last name, I was like, "Huh, I wonder if there's any relation there."
Yeah.
But I think to your point about him being just a really musical guy, you can tell he's worked with everyone. I mean,
Yeah.
he's worked with Norah Jones, he's worked with Mos Def, he's worked with Frank Ocean, he's worked with John Mayer. He's really sounds like he's kind of the guy that people go to, you know, in terms of whenever they need somebody that's got a very specific specialty. And I actually had the same note that you did. I wrote, "The song takes a hard left in about 5 minutes, 10 seconds, and it feels completely different." I loved that about it. I was so surprised. It was giving me a little bit, I'm a big Steely Dan fan, and
Mm.
so I was getting a little bit of, like, East St. Louis Toodaloo
Mhm.
vibes, you know, like, at the end there. And it's not quite like, I can't call it ragtime, but it goes into, like, this really interesting space.
Yeah.
'Cause it starts out, you know, it tells an entire story in 6.5 minutes, I feel like, and you start with just the guitar, then slowly the tambourine builds, then the horns come in, and you get to enjoy it in that spot for a moment, and then, yeah, you get this hard left, you know, towards the end of the song that is so unexpected and so cool.
The other thing that's really fun is that, it I don't as far as I can tell, they filmed the making of the record because
Mhm.
there are videos on YouTube of entire songs from this album, including this one. So you can actually see how they're putting it
Wow.
together. And the thing is, if you just like to Charlie Hunter's credit, if you just listen to the record, you don't know that it's one guy doing the whole introduction, the whole bass and guitar thing
Wow.
together. But when you watch him, it's like, oh, that's all coming out of one guy's hands, which is incredible. And the thing that's also interesting is, I don't know if you know this, but East St. Louis Toodaloo, there's the first version of that song was written and recorded by Duke Ellington in the 20s. Um, and there's a really cool interview with the guitar player, I'm blanking on his name, Jeff Baxter, um, talking about how when they were putting that song together, he was like, he plays pedal steel as well as guitar.
Yeah.
And so he was like, well, everybody had to kind of like divvy up, like, how are we going to do the Duke Ellington thing? And he was like, well, I'll do this part on the steel. And, he like found his little spot. And so that's another incredibly oddball mechanical instrument that people have done really musical things with. So that's, you know, kind of an
Yeah.
interesting correlation there.
Well, and you and I talked about this whenever we had kind of our pre-conversation. I don't plan which songs, you know, I'll get my guest songs, and then I kind of, like, feel like how I'm inspired or how they lead into what I'm listening to or what I have on playlists, but there's always a through line regardless, like,
Mm.
it's not ever planned, but I love that. It came in even though these were 2 artists I'd never heard of, I wasn't familiar with their music, there were connections between your songs and mine,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
so it'll be fun once we get into my picks to sort of talk about the correlation there, and I love that that just happens organically. It's not I'm never looking for it, but it always pops up. It always
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about so in terms of this Charlie Hunter song, I think you were saying earlier that this is not necessarily finger style blues guitar. This song doesn't really fit squarely in that genre. Is that right?
Well, it doesn't, but the thing is, uh, it's the same technique. This whole thing of having to divide your brain in two and do half of the music with your thumb and half of it with your fingers. And in fact, that's the basic idea. But you have to be able to do all these things kind of contrapuntally and interacting with each other. And um, on Charlie Hunter's Patreon, he actually spends a lot of time talking about one of the great uh, blues guitar players from the 1920s named Blind Blake, who's widely considered like the most fearsome, challenging guy from that entire period. And uh, and so Charlie Hunter like has these videos where he breaks down like he's basically, here's what I've been working on, here's what I've been trying to figure out about Blind Blake. And part of my interest in Charlie Hunter is that on the guitar, I'm interested in that division of labor between the bass and the melody. And so I actually, for my, for, my wife and I had our 20th anniversary during the pandemic. And it
Okay.
was like, well, we can't go anywhere. We can't do anything. So she was like, do you need a new guitar? And I was like, yeah, I want one of these hybrid guitars. So I had them, I had one of these hybrid guitars made. And so
Oh,
I've
wow.
played a few gigs on it. And every time I do, I'm like, I should not do this again until I've spent another year working on this. But it's really like, it's just like a bigger cousin to playing the guitar, but it's tuned a little differently, and it's just a bigger beast. So I'm interested in what he's doing, in part because it's informed how I play guitar, and in part because there's a part of me that wants to run away and join the circus and play one of those instruments
Of
more.
course.
But
Well,
but he grew up. His mother was a luthier, a guitar repair person,
okay.
and listened to all of the like blues stuff that people were listening to in the 60s. So he grew up hearing Blind Blake and hearing John Hurt and all these different people. And so like that certainly informed like the fact
Right.
that he plays this hybrid guitar in a similar way.
That just seems impossible to me. Somebody who's not naturally inclined to music or has that as a skill set, it just like, the thought of playing 2 instruments on one and like you said, having to split your brain, I just can't even imagine.
It's not that exotic because pianists do it all the time. I mean,
Well,
I almost picked, I sifted through, I almost picked a Jelly Roll Morton solo piano piece.
yeah,
I almost picked a piece by this pianist, Ray Bryant, who played with Miles Davis and did a lot of solo records. Because, they do that. They have the left hand doing all the accompaniment and the right hand doing all the improvisation. And,
yeah,
it's not that unusual. And then the other big analogy is the jazz organ players like Jimmy
mhm,
Smith, who basically play the bass with a combination of foot pedals in the left hand and play on the right hand. So, there's a classic kind of jazz ensemble from the 60s, the organ combo, 50s and 60s, that's basically
yeah.
just like an organ player with a drummer and maybe a guitar player or a tenor saxophonist or both. There's no bass player. The organ player is taking care of the bass and playing everything else at the same time. They're doing three things. They're playing bass and chords and melody. So
It's
it
crazy.
is crazy, but and the story about Jimmy Smith is that he basically spent 2 years like in a shed behind his house teaching himself how to do that before he would go out and
Wow.
play a gig. And so basically every time I go out and play on this hybrid guitar, I'm like, no, I need 2 years in a shed in
2 more
Philadelphia.
years in the shed.
Yeah, basically just, to keep to before I go do this again.
Well, I have to call before we move on to your second pick, I also have to say I love the name of this album.
Oh
So this
yeah.
song, as you said, is called "Who Put You Behind the Wheel," and it's from his album called "Everybody Has a Plan Until They Get Punched in the Mouth." Love that. So great.
That's apparently a Mike Tyson quote.
It's true.
But I think that all of the titles on this record are things that somebody said. I
Okay.
think all the titles were quotes. I don't know that, but that's my guess.
It seems like it. I mean, I could definitely see that
There's
after you say
another
that.
album, I think it came out before this one, and the title of that album is Gentlemen, I neglected to inform you, you will not be getting paid, which was obviously heard at the end of a gig.
Not what any musician wants to hear at the end of a gig, but
No, no, it is not.
well, tell me about your second pick. I really love this song too, so I'm, like, so interested to get into this one also.
Yeah, this song, American Romeo, it's by a band called The Old Ceremony. The Old Ceremony is a band led by a friend of mine named Django Haskins, who I've known since he was about 16 and I was maybe in my 20s. I used to
Wow.
teach at a guitar workshop in the summer, and Django came first as a student and then an intern and then a teacher. And we both lived in New York for a long time, and then he moved to the Raleigh Durham area, and started this
Okay.
band, The Old Ceremony. This is their first record. They have a new record out now. They've been making records for like 20 years. And it started off because he's a songwriter and he loved, the Beatles and Elvis Costello and Tom Petty and like, all these like classic
Yeah.
songwriters, Leonard Cohen. But he wanted to have this kind of noir element. So he was writing, some of the songs he was writing were these great story songs. I almost picked the song right after this on the record called Olay, which is also
Yeah.
really great. And clearly informed by his time in New York. But so he has these multi instrumentalists in his band, like someone who can play vibes as well as piano, someone who can play violin, and he's actually, we talk about this sometimes because while I'm trying to learn how to play this ridiculous hybrid guitar, Django's been teaching himself the tenor saxophone. So
Oh,
he's
wow.
actually finally like, he sent me a clip the other day, and he like actually brought his saxophone to an Old Ceremony gig and like played a saxophone solo. He's usually
Wow.
plays guitar and sings, but anyway, so this is their first record, I think. And I don't know if he played this song for me like when we were just hanging around, but he used to walk up to my apartment on his way to the main drag in our neighborhood in Brooklyn. And he always had a new song. And eventually I got sick of it. And I was like, God, I got to write more quickly because Django always has a new song. And so during the pandemic, a bunch of our friends started an online songwriting meeting on Monday nights,
Oh,
which has
cool.
actually survived the pandemic. So Django was in that for a long time. And so I heard a lot of his newer songs as he was working on them. And so, I mean, a lot of Django's one of the people that, um, you know, I would consider as much of an influence in terms of songwriting as anybody that, I grew up listening to, and a few of the other people in that group as well. I can't write like them. And I just hear their writing and it's just really inspiring the way that they write lyrics or the way that they put music together or both.
I loved it. I'm a big lyrics person.
Mm.
Anybody that's ever listened to the show even once knows that that's what I live for in music. Of course, I'm love the musical part of it, but for me, it's the lyrics that suck me in always.
Yeah.
And I just loved how smart these were. They were playful. It wasn't smart like in a condescending way
Mhm.
or a performative way.
Yeah.
It was just it fit. It was
Yeah.
so great. I felt like I was sitting in a cafe in Paris, it immediately transported me.
Mhm.
And then he sort of changes and talks about going down to Greece, and then all of a sudden I'm with him on
Mhm.
the beaches of Crete,
Mhm.
like, I just I it was amazing to me how even on a first listen, the song transported me, I think exactly where he wanted you to, it was perfect. And I did listen they released a new album you mentioned called Earthbound. This album or this song is on, the Old Ceremony album. It's called Old Ceremony from 2005. And they released one in 2024 called Earthbound, which I was kinda just skipping through and landed on a song called Valerie Solanas. So I was like, it's about I Shot Andy Warhol. Um, and it's so different. It's like a
Mhm.
completely different vibe
Mhm.
than this song.
Mhm.
And so I love that too. I love that it surprised me. And I was getting like, I do this a lot because again, I can't speak in terms of like chord progressions and reading music. So I just compare things that I know. And especially the songs from the Earthbound album, the new album, were giving me real like Death Cab for Cutie meets They Might Be Giant vibes. Like they were like, it sounded like if those 2 bands had a baby, it might be this.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it was really I'm like, I would never put those 2 bands together, but when I was thinking of, like, what is this reminding me of, or what is this feeling influenced by? It was those 2, and then, of course, when I hear you say, Leonard Cohen and Tom Petty and all that, I get that as well, but that's what immediately came to mind.
Yeah. I mean, Django is one of those people who is both really lyrically adept and musically. Like he's a
Okay.
really good musician. And so, you know, there's an album there's a song from like an album in between the two we've been talking about called Papers in Order. And, he was learning to play piano because he wanted to write differently than he wrote on guitar. And so he played me the song that he was working on. And I was like, it's like you were thinking about Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder at the same time. And he was like, exactly. And I was like, you know, and so it's almost like this game of like, I mean, you don't want to write parodies or pastiches,
Yeah.
but if you've got big ears and you've got a lot of things coming in, it gives you stuff to choose from. And, you know, um, you end up working through whatever your influences are one way or another.
And I kinda love that, I kind of like hearing things where you can say like, "Oh," where it's not a direct copy. I mean, like, you listen to the Black Keys and it's immediately apparent that they love Steve Miller, right? It sounds almost like exactly like Steve Miller Band. But this, I could just feel bits and pieces, like you said, it didn't feel like he was
Yeah.
trying to duplicate, it just felt like there's a whole lot of music in this person, and they're putting things together in a really structured, smart way that I appreciated.
Well, yeah, and there's also this thing of like there's the song and then there's like the rendering of the song, like how it's arranged and performed.
Mhm.
And one thing that Django and I share is that, we and a lot of songwriters that I know and like, you know, going back as far as the Beatles is like, and further, obviously, is like, is an awareness of like Tin Pan Alley and that songwriting
Hmm.
tradition where the song was not so tied up with the record. Like a
Yeah.
song that came out in 1935 would get recorded by dozens of people if it was lucky,
Yeah.
and so it wasn't like there was one version of the song. It was like the song stands, and then how are you going to do the song? And
Right.
so, you can hear that a song like American Romeo, you could sit and play it on the piano or the guitar by itself. You could do that version that's all like sort of glossed up with like the vibes and all of that kind of, period sort of. He manages to make it like sound like a pop record, but it has a kind of period feel because the vibes are
Yes.
not what you usually hear on a pop record. But if you took the vibes out and replaced it and changed up some of the elements, it would feel completely different. But the bottom line is it's a song, and then it happens to be dressed that way for that record, and that's a lot of how I prefer to think about writing as well, is not about, well, what's the drum sound on this song, but what's the song, and then how are we going to, make it go when we go to perform or record it.
Yeah, that sort of leads me to a question that I love to ask people that wear a lot of hats within the music space. Do you have a preference or a favorite, like teaching versus performing versus writing? Is it like impossible to pick? Am I asking you to pick your favorite child?
Well, you know, they all like interact, and at the end of the day, like as long as I'm dealing with music, I'm happy to be there,
Yeah.
Um, there was a period of time when I was writing a lot about music, and I was like, I'm sick of talking about music. I want to just be doing it more,
Yeah.
and then, that's like an interesting thing to sort of work your way through. And I actually have been teaching on and off in some way for my entire adult life. And I actually enjoy it way more now than I ever did before,
Okay.
partly because as I got clear about what I was doing as a musician, I got clear about what I was going to spend time explaining to people, and there's more of a correlation now between what I do as a performer and what I do as a teacher. Like I just
Okay.
did a live stream this morning on YouTube about one of my own songs, which I've never done before, but I did it because I had a bunch of people that I teach traditional music to, because like you can because like people will live stream performances I've done or post videos or like stuff like that. People that I only once would have known as students have some dim awareness that like I also go out and do this. And so they were like, well, that song that you wrote, how do you do that? I'm like, oh, nobody really wants to know about that. And like a bunch of people were like, no, actually we do.
We
Like
do.
we've been trying to figure it out and I don't know how it. So I was like, oh great. Well, I'll do a live stream where I just break down how this song goes. It's all the same stuff that I teach if I'm teaching a traditional blues song. It's all the
Okay.
same stuff with the hands. It's just one of my songs instead.
That's
So
cool though. I like that sort of clarity bred you enjoying it all
yeah.
the way around, you know? So that's cool. Well, and then in another unexpected through line, I guess, you mentioned that you know Django Haskins. He's the lead singer and founder of this band, which I did not know when I chose my first song, which is a song called I'll See You in My Dreams by one of my favorites, Django Reinhardt. And this is from the Jangology Volume 9 album from 1939 to 1940. So we're talking about music that's almost 100 years old. And I've loved Django Reinhardt since I was introduced to him in college in Denton. Um, I don't know. I think it's just it makes me happy. It makes me smile. It feels of a different time, but also still kind of modern in some way to me. Like I just think maybe because it's so brilliant. It just I feel like I the brilliance coming through the song, if that's possible. But I got to assume that you were familiar with Django Reinhardt being so prolific
Well,
on the
since,
guitar.
since you like connections, I will tell you that the reason my introduction to Django Reinhardt is that my first cousin, who's a year or two older than me, grew up in Dallas. which is not
Okay.
far from Denton.
Okay.
And when my aunt and uncle were like, "Oh, we got to send David a birthday present this year," my cousin said, "Well, she had a friend in high school who was into the guitar, and they said, well, if David's learning guitar, we should send him Django Reinhardt records."
Ah,
So I got sent these two Django Reinhardt records and fell in love with it immediately. And what I always tell people is, I learned violin in school starting in fourth grade, and I was just the worst violin student. I loved music, and I couldn't understand why the violin was so hard for me to like feel good about when I loved music so much. And if I had heard Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli just a couple of years earlier, I loved Stefan Grappelli just as much
yep.
as Django Reinhardt. I mean, talk about just the effortlessness of it, and the joy. And it just feels like it's always just about to like float off into the
Yep.
distance, and I just not float, but just like, spring off into the distance. There's so much,
Yes.
so it's just so beautiful. And so yeah, I mean, it's funny, I've known about Django Reinhardt since I was 16, but have never tried to figure out how to play like him. It just didn't occur to me because it was just like, it's like, it felt like, well, I'm going to go into my basement and make a feature film now. It's like, it just seemed
Right.
like ridiculous. And listening to this, I mean, I've listened to so much music in that genre since then that I sort of got to when you posted that song, I was like, I sort of got to hear it with like brand new ears, like, oh, he's
Yeah.
doing that thing that I really like. He's playing over the chord changes and he's doing that jazz guitar thing that he invented. And the closest I've come is that I made an instrumental record a couple years ago. Uh, and I had always loved the Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli version of Viper's Dream,
Yeah.
which I thought they wrote because I'd never heard it anywhere else. And then when I was making the record, I had to figure out who wrote it. And it turns out it was written in 1935 by an American band leader in Chicago who was like I
Oh.
can't even remember his name because he was not super famous. He didn't become like Duke Ellington or Fletcher
Okay.
Henderson. He was just like, that was a job you could have in the 1930s. You
Yeah.
could run a dance band, and that's what he did. And he wrote this tune. But everybody since the 1930s has learned the Django and Stefan version. So that is the version. So I
Yeah.
came up with like a solo arrangement of it so that I could play it because I loved it so much. But I've never like gone and learned like how
It
to play
seems
Django
so
Reinhardt stuff.
hard to duplicate.
Well, someone once sort of, described uh, Django Reinhardt and Charlie Christian as the George Washington and Abraham Lincoln of jazz guitar. Now they lived at the exact same time, just about, but like one is like the acoustic master of the instrument, and one is the guy
Yeah.
who invented and mastered like the electric version of the instrument. And so, I was a Charlie Christian person. Like
Okay.
that sounded way more approachable to me somehow than Django. So I spent my time trying to learn how to play all the Charlie Christian solos I could, and just listened to Django because he does that fast stuff.
Yeah.
Charlie Christian never does that like kind of thing the way that Django does. So it just felt more approachable.
Yeah, it does. Like I said, as a non-musician, when I listen to that music, it seems impossible to me
Mm-hmm.
to duplicate that sound. But I will give a tip too. This is my Sunday morning cooking breakfast playlist. Like I'll throw on just because we're speaking of genres and
Mm.
we've talked about, fingerstyle blues. I've always heard this sort of called gypsy jazz.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
that, I mean, I don't know if it's PC, but
I,
like, is that the correct?
you're probably not supposed to say gypsy anymore. Romany, or I'm not sure. I'll only get in more trouble if I keep talking. But I
Right.
mean, I think people have been calling it that for so long. The thing that's so interesting about Django is that he basically there's like an entire genre that's based on what Django Reinhardt did. Like there's
Ah,
very few other things like that where the repertoire, the approach, the sound, there's like just dozens and dozens of human beings running around the planet, probably more, who it's kind of like what happened with like Bill Monroe was like bristled when other people started calling their music bluegrass. He
yeah.
was like, my band is Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, and bluegrass is what we play. And then other people started coming along with the same instrumentation, the same Appalachian background, the same harmony approach, and the same chops. And people started calling that bluegrass. And he was like, no, It's only bluegrass. It was like he wanted to be like the Champagne region in France. He was
Right.
like, this is like the controlled name for this is music by Bill Monroe. Like you can call it sparkling wine. It's not champagne,
Right.
and but that didn't work. And bluegrass is a genre name now. Well, with Django Reinhardt, it's like they call it gypsy jazz now because Django and his siblings, he played with his brother and other people. He was a gypsy, and or that's what he was called himself at the
Back
time, or
then,
what they called,
yes.
yeah, whatever it is. And so like there's this entire genre that's basically, well, it's similar to the bluegrass thing. It's like, well, it's what Django did, only it's everything that is developed directly out of that particular band. So the idea of like multiple guitars and maybe there's a fiddle and you play with these kinds of rhythms and this pulse and I mean, I'm sure once you get inside it, it's a lot more for everybody who does it. I'm sure that when you get up close and inside of it, everybody's doing it differently with their own personality. But the point of
Right.
departure is this one period with this one set of musicians, which is kind of
Yeah.
incredible.
Well, and it is, like I said, throw on Django Reinhardt radio on Spotify for your Sunday morning brunch needs, and it will start your week off right.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Well, for my last song, I rounded it out with kind of a strange pick, maybe for today's playlist, but it's a song called Wildfire by John Mayer. Not the Michael Martin Murphy version, which I also love, but, no, this one is the John Mayer version from his Paradise Valley album from 2013. The listeners are gonna think I'm on John Mayer's payroll because he's been coming up a lot lately for some weird reason, but I find him really interesting because I think he's a super talented guy. He's really prolific and he's also really polarizing. I think because he's kind of a pretty boy. He's had all these, celebrity girlfriend relationships that have made him tabloid fodder. Um, but I think he's really good. I think it's especially in terms of guitar and the way he sort of changes genres. He has John Mayer Trio, which is pretty squarely in the blues space. He's obviously got a lot of pop. He tours now with Dead and Company. So he's doing lots of different things. He collaborates with everybody. He's got a song with Zach Bryan that's country. He's got a song called Automatic Yes with Zed. He's got an Alicia Cara song. Like he's really one of those guys that's kind of everywhere. And I think if he was a joke, I don't think he'd work with the quality of musicians that he works with. Um, but I also thought too, when I was thinking of fingerstyle blues, not necessarily knowing exactly what it was, this song kind of sprung to mind too. And I don't know if it's just that beginning, that opening,
Mm.
whenever you first hear him kind of just single finger picking, to kind of get you into the song. Um, but I'm curious to your thoughts. Was this a song that you knew? What were your thoughts about this particular? Yeah,
Yeah,
I wish everyone could see your face. You're like,
no,
yeah, no,
no,
I
I
did not
was.
know
I
this song.
mean, obviously, I know who John Mayer is, and I know all of that sort of cultural information about him. Um, and I'm aware that he's a serious musician. I mean, he obviously. I mean, musicians have this thing of like, well, can he play? And which is really sort of dumb because the question would be like, can they play and write and leave space and interact nicely with other people and listen to the rhythm section and conduct themselves like a civilized person. It's like there's a
Right.
million things that matter besides how well you can make your fingers go wheedly wheedly wheedly. But the thing that I have never really had much of an opinion about him one way or another. But the fact that the title of his first record was a riff on a Hank Mobley album on the Blue
Yeah.
Note label, I was like, well, this guy's got to be put together right, because he's like, here's his first record, and it's a reference to a Hank Mobley album. I was like,
Yep.
he's got to be okay, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so you know, um, did he not write this song? I don't know this song
No, he did. He did write this song.
because you said there was another version of it.
But there is another version on the album, that Frank Ocean that he does
Oh, okay.
with Frank Ocean, actually, and it sounds completely different. It's like
Oh,
2 different songs.
no,
It's
that's
not
cool.
like a duet or a collaboration. It really is kind of a different interpretation,
Yeah.
that's very much in the style of Frank Ocean, I would say. And I liked too that these lyrics are light and playful. That sort of alluded to the feelings I got from American Romeo also.
And that's hard to do. Like, it's hard to write a song that's good and that isn't like it's like I have this cousin who was a graduate student. It's a long story, but I met him. I didn't really know him until I went to school and discovered he was a graduate student at the same school. But he said that he thought people should, instead of teaching novels in an English class, they should use stand-up comedy records,
Yeah.
because a serious novel, like, nobody knows if it's working or not. I mean, people do. My wife's a writer; she'll kill me. But he's like, you put on stand-up, and everybody knows if they laughed or not.
Right.
So it's like it's easy to write those weird, convoluted, like early Dylan period, mid '60s Dylan lyrics, and have everybody go like, well, I don't know if it's good or not. I mean, maybe I'm just like too dumb to understand what you're talking about. But a song that's like got a little bit of wit, or that's trying to tell a story, or that's trying to be a little less weighty, it's a lot harder because there's nowhere to hide. It's either you did it right or you didn't.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and, this song is a good example of that, at least for me, and I love just that you and me are catching on like a wildfire. I just think that's a cool turn of phrase, to sort of talk about getting along with someone, and we all know that feeling of when you first meet someone and there's, like, a connection that you can't really explain, and, I just feel like this song does a good job of capturing that, the same way American Romeo put me on vacation and
Mhm.
mingling with people in different cities, different European cities. This kind of did the same. It put me around a campfire, in Montana, and I was immediately transported. So that was kind of the through line for me with adding this one to the playlist. And then, like I said, learning that um, Charlie Hunter had worked with him and Frank Ocean. I was like, okay, so this is making sense now. Well, before we wrap it up today, tell me what's next for you. Are you touring? Can we see you play anywhere? New music coming?
Well, I play in Austin every month, and then I have like, if I travel a little bit to play. Like, I'm going to Houston and Baton Rouge next week, and then I'm going to be in Colorado in the summer. I'm teaching, but then I'm also going to play a couple of shows, and then I'll be on the East Coast for a couple of things in the fall. And then I'm easy to find online because I do my teaching and I have a YouTube channel, and I write a newsletter every week, and then I teach this ongoing online guitar class, basically.
And so
So
I'll call out Fretboard Confidential so
mhm.
people know where they can find you in terms
Yep.
of instruction. Can they find tour dates and your music and your YouTube? Where's
Yeah,
the best place to find that?
yeah, that's it's on that site. It's just on fretboardconfidential.com slash
Okay.
about, and that's
Okay.
where that stuff is. And
Perfect.
so,
Well, again, I'll spell all that out, listeners, so don't worry, and we'll also put it when we post the show, we'll include all this info. But David, thank you so much for sharing what you're listening to this week, for bringing us a different genre and two new artists that I'd not heard of. I know the listeners are going to be excited to check out something new. And I've been wanting to talk about Django Reinhardt for a minute. So I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to do that with you. And listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Fretboard Confidential and sign up for classes, you can visit David's website at Fretboard Confidential. That's FretboardConfidential.com. No, that's a lot, but I always spell it out because I'm old. And as always, listeners, please be sure to follow, download, and share the show. And if you love listening, drop us a review on Apple or Spotify. And last but not least, to stay informed on all things Super Awesome Mix and what are you listening to, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Super Awesome Mix. Thanks for listening, and please join me again next week to find your new favorite song.